deal in that, but what you do helps enormously this sort of reform. That is, you are part of my conspiracy to change the world, because the more you perfect capital markets, the less valid is the fear of a capital risk. And finally, you have economies of scale. One of the problems in Chile at the beginning were somewhat high administration costs, because of course we had to manage very few accounts, and of course, as I said, computer power had a completely different cost than now. But in a country like this, you see, with enormous economies of scale in information processing and investment managers, I believe that the cost of managing the system will be some basis points, but very low. In Chile, incidentally, is now 0.6 of 1% of assets managed. That is 2/3 of 1%. It began at 1.3, 1.4. But today is very low. If you get 10%, you should be willing to pay 2/3 of 1% to whoever manages your money and still be very happy. So there is a very unfair criticism that some people say, yes, but 2/3 of 1% is very high. Maybe it's very high in America, where you can manage funds at lower cost, but the trend is for lower cost as assets increase and as information technologies go cheaper every day. Now, you have three big problems in my view. The first one, of course, are the budget deficits. I would not go into the detail of that. You know it better than I. After all, well, you have a national security problem that we do not have in Chile. You have some entitlements that we do not have to the degree you have them in America. But the fact of the matter is that it's much more difficult to do a reform like this when you begin with budget deficits. So any effort to eliminate budget deficits before a reform like this will be very, of course, useful. The second one, and that I am surprised since I was here 30 years ago, is the growing entitlement culture. A sense among some people, not all Americans, that they are entitled to the welfare society, the sort of thinking I see so much in Europe, and that has led great countries like Germany, Italy, France, Spain to have enormous trouble. That is a fact, and of course that goes against a system like this, because if people believe that the government has the duty to finance their retirement, their medical system, their prescription drugs, their everything, well, why should you save? A government with money coming from somewhere will give me those benefits. There is not a connection between the need to pay for those benefits and the demand for increasing and increasing and increasing entitlements. And finally, of course, there are vested interests that are very difficult to convince. I have always said I can convince an honest man from any political persuasion any day with this idea, because this idea is not an idea of the left or the right. It's an idea about giving workers capital, an idea that a progressive should love. And it's an idea about using the private enterprise and markets to compound that capital, an idea that a conservative should like. So I believe this blends the best of so-called progressive or conservative idea. But with vested interests different. Some people will lose power. Social Security in America and in every country in the world is the largest government program. And there are a lot of politicians and bureaucrats that derive some benefit from that. There are other politicians who are patriots, of course, and who are much willing to change this, as I mentioned before, from both parties. But there are other people who would like to concentrate this enormous power, and that, of course, is a difficulty. Now, the key requisites, in my view, to move ahead, and as you can see, I am escaping the short-term political debate. Maybe in the question and answer I can say something about that, but I want to be very careful about that. But the key requisites, in my view, are, again, this enormous government program created by the great President Roosevelt, having benefited our grandmothers, will never be changed if it is seen as the program of one party against another party. I strongly believe that you need leaders who are able to rise above party for a reform like this, like you have done in other periods in your history where you have had faced great challenges. Second, the inflection points are very important. I never thought that last year with President Bush or 7 years ago with President Clinton, when we began talking about personal accounts in this country, that would be possible, because still the Social Security system is having a surplus of $80 billion a year that is financing spending by the government, including breaches to nowhere, as you call it. So it's very difficult to cut that amount of money. So up to now, the Social Security system is in surplus. But once the baby boomers begin to retire, that will happen only in 2008. You may remember the president saying that both he and Bill Clinton will be 60 in 2008. So the baby boomers begin to retire at that moment, and in 2012, the system begin to have an inflection point in the sense that the surplus begin declining. And in 2017, the system is in deficit, and in 2020, you have billions and billions and hundreds of billions until in 2030 and 40, you are hitting the iceberg. So this reform is very difficult to do them much before its time has come. So I am a patient man. I know that to change the world, you have to plant the seeds and water them very carefully with persistence and even with love, if you want. And someday the flower will blossom, but you never know when exactly the flower will blossom. And it is immature to be depressed because in a given year, in a given moment, your reform does not go forward. Someday, I am sure this country will have to move in the direction of including an element, I don't know whether it will be partial, whether it will be total, of personal account. And at that moment, leadership will be clear. And by leadership, I mean people in government, people in the media, people in private companies who are willing to educate people in whatever is correct, even though it may be unpopular in the short run. The only way to change the world is someone leading the pack. You must go in front of the people. If you simply are always looking at what the people are saying, by definition, you are not a leader, but a follower. You have to risk something, but you have to educate the people, and if you are successful in your education process, you make popular what is correct. But it's not the other way around. You cannot have tomorrow morning a poll on whether you have to do a structural reform of this size. First, you have to educate the people. And when you do that and you get in front, of course, you run some risk. But I believe that that is the essence of leadership, and we are not in this world to enjoy the privileges of power, but we are here to make what is correct and to do good. So I am optimistic. I do remember what a great Frenchman, Alexis de Tocqueville, said in 1835 in his famous Democracy in America. He almost made a prophecy. He said, the American Republic will endure until politicians realize they can bribe the people with their own money. And in a way, the huge welfare state, especially in Europe, has arrived to that point. I believe that in America, it's an inflection point where you have not gone so far. But also, another great American, a great founding father, of course, James Madison wrote, "This is not the glory of the people of America that they can override customs and let prevail their own good sense." I believe in Madison, so I believe that there is hope. So thank you very much, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Of course, I am willing to take some questions.
Could you describe to us what happened over the last 18 months in Washington and
yes.
Why?
Yes, I met President Bush in 1997. I was at the same time writing an open letter to President Clinton in the Wall Street Journal that took me initially to the West Wing to discuss my ideas with Larry Summers and Gene Sperling.